leaders, LG leaders have been given the announcement. Tomorrow we have a pot bless right here in front, as like before 7 p.m. tomorrow. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are the remnant. We are gathered. At the start of each of these, I will let you know the latest culinary update. So for lunch, I discovered that I was dining with royalty. It was Brother Ho and Nancy, but I discovered that Brother Ho's name is King. So I am truly honored. We had sea bass, we had sea cucumber. It was amazing. Let's just quickly go through what we covered yesterday. So yesterday we talked about creation, that work is good. This is the way work was. Right now we're going to talk about how the fall impacted on work, that the process of working is cursed. That's the way work is. That's how we experience it now. And then in the next workshop, we'll look at redemption. What difference has it made that Jesus has come? Workplaces can be redeemed, and that's the way work could be. I'm very grateful that you've come. I can understand why people would not want to come to hear about the fall, how work is cursed. But this is the experience that we have. Yesterday I was talking to Cynthia, who works in conservation, and she was saying she wrote about a page of things about the way work was good, but she said she would write 3 pages about how work is hard and difficult. And she, of course, is working today. So yesterday, when we looked at this question, what is the first word that comes to mind? I'm curious about what you said, but there were definitely more people who said that work was difficult and hard than said that it was, and had positive things to say about work. In fact, if you think about the metaphors for work, the synonyms for work that we have, synonyms, it's hard to think of a positive one. Toil, labor, that's right, slog. In Australia, we call it hard yakka. Then they're all negative concepts, negative terms. And generally in our society, the concept is you work as hard as you can for as short as you can. And there's this idea that life doesn't begin until work stops. And remember what I said, that when we think about work, work is not just the things that we are paid to do. Work is also the things we're not paid to do as well. Anything we do with intent or purpose is work. So what is our experience of work? Well, working is often seen as a bad thing. That's the way work is. And why is it like that? Well, actually, the Bible tells us why it is like that. So once again, I'll get you to work on your table groups. And this time what we're going to look at is Genesis 3. What can Genesis 3 teach us about the bad of our working, how hard working is? We want to know how sin or evil impacts on relationships and on work. So I'd love you in your table groups to once again get out the Bible, read Genesis 3, and have a look at what it says there. How has work been impacted by sin, the entry of evil into the world? So let's have a time of sharing and then we'll come back to it and we'll collect some ideas. So we're looking at Genesis 3 and what we learned there about the bad of our working and how sin impacts on possibly working relationships and on work itself. So who are you going to pick first, Anne? Okay. Okay. I love the way everyone just keeps encouraging someone to share.
You want me to share about the the question that one.
Yeah, just in Genesis 3, what did you notice in Genesis 3 about the bad of work, the impact of sin on work?
And our table here, we did share. The common word is, on the bad of our working is if we don't follow God's command and obey, it's definitely painful. That is a common word among us, and the suffering, if you look at Adam and Eve. Oh, okay. We are sharing on this table, saying that, the bad of our working is the ultimate is the pains that you were going to, you were going to face it, and you were going to be painful like Adam and Eve. But on the other side of the pictures is God's love us so much, and with this disobedience of us, but God still give us a chance and a chance and a chance. If you really read through, the Bible, at the end of the day, the ultimate one is Christ comes in to overtook all. But before Christ comes in, it is the chance to give it to us one more time. And the end time is, it's finished. It's on the cross.
Thank you very much. So obedience to God in work is the critical thing, and this is the break that happened in Genesis 3, which still impacts on our work today. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, it's because of the Adam sin, then it's like kind of result of the Adam sin. Then man had to toil, had to painfully toil and sweat for food, for survival. Meaning, if you don't work hard, you even can't survive. This is, in a way, like it's a punishment from the sin. Okay, so there's a bad upside. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so we see those words, don't we? In the consequences of the sin, it says we have to work with sweat and toil. I think in Malaysia you don't even have to do much to sweat, but we have that concept of work is harder than it might have been. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so how does sin affect relationships? You can see that it's a messed up relationship after that in Genesis 3. The husband is supposed to listen to God. Adam was supposed to listen to God, but he listened to his wife. The wife was supposed to submit to Adam, but he got deceived by the serpent. And the human beings are supposed to have dominion over creation, but they listen to a creature. Despite all that human failure and sin, God still showed his mercy by providing them with garments of skin. Yeah, so that they can have another, they can live life outside the Garden of Eden, and it was not as pleasant as it was before. As we can see, there are many adjectives there to describe things like sweat, noun and adjectives, sweat, thorns and thistles, toil, painful, curse. So in contrary to Genesis 2, we can see that work is no longer as enjoyable and as fruitful as it was before. Yeah.
That's a beautiful response, very thoughtful response. Thank you for that. I think it's quite amazing how quickly relationships are impacted, aren't they, once sin has entered, and particularly that blame game that happens. In fact, Adam tries to blame God, which is unbelievable. This woman that you gave me made this happen. Amazing. Yeah. Okay. Who else?
I'm not very good in connecting and with what people say. I don't hear so well. So forgive me if I say something seemingly unconnected or repeating what people say, okay? So that's my apology before I start. I'm given the mic, so I was wondering that your question points us to relationships. Is it the first time we see the word husband? In my version, which is a New King James Version, there's mentioned, there's one word there, verse 6 at the end of it. It says husband.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's the first time it actually
Yeah,
appears, but I'm not sure of the Hebrew.
yeah. And then the direct result seems to be the shame. It says shame, and realizing shame make them hide. Or put another way, from our own experience, we think we can hide, but so we look at things to hide with, like trees here, but maybe we can't really hide. Yeah. So
You can't hide from God.
The effect on relationship, the trees provided food. But in this case, after the shame, they have to hide also their shame, and they use the tree also to hide what they realize is shame. So the question asks about effect, but it seems that the relationship between the woman and the man, did they have a name by then? You say Adam and Eve, but did they have a name yet? Don't know.
Again, I'm not sure. I don't think so. Did the name Adama and Eve, they're sort
Yeah.
of symbolic names,
Okay,
but we call them Adam and Eve, yeah.
Okay. So in the shame that the woman experienced, she seemed to straight away go to the man and offered and gave to her husband. The fruit was offered to the husband. So, but
Sorry, you need to speak into the mic. We can't quite.
what I meant to say is, what was offered to the husband was something not good, but the relationship made her give to the man. I mean, offered to the husband. Yeah. So I mean, these are some of the things I gleaned from what I'm thinking about now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, so all the relationships are impacted actually once sin has entered. The relationship with God, the relationship between the man and the woman, and the relationship with creation as well. So, yeah.
All right, yeah. So before I talk about the impact on the relationship, maybe I will talk about what causes what caused them to sin against God. So first of all, we can see that when the serpent tempted Eve, she is easily wandered off, even though she knew the truth. You know, I believe that Adam actually told her about it when God commanded Adam. So being easily influenced by others causes us to sin easily. So in life, we can see many people who are Christians for many years, but they might still believe in all sorts of things. You know, people say. Secondly, we can see that when problems come, when they realize that they have done the wrong thing, they blame others. Okay. So they never take it to their own responsibility for their actions, for their thoughts and everything. And thirdly, when we see the order of leadership is broken, we see that Satan can easily have a foothold, because God commanded the man should lead the family, but instead, like what Brother Chavez shared, that the order has already broken. So should be ruling over the animals, but then they listen to the animals, and the man of the house listen to the woman. It's not that you cannot listen to your wife, but you should.
Thank you.
Yeah, I must be more diplomatic here. So it's the husband has the role to lead the wife and the family in the right way. So talking about the impact on relationships, we can see that the relationship between man and animals broken. Okay, so they become enemy. Then ultimately we see that the relationship between God and man broken. So we see that man's effort to cover up their sin using fig leaves, this work. But God given us his son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross, and that's God's provision for us. So the impact on work is the work becomes hard for us, difficult. And of course, in today's context, some might be working in a white-collar society where you don't have to sweat a lot to earn money, but yet you do have to spend time and so on. So it's still work involved. If you don't work, you have nothing to eat. Just like what the Bible says. And we can see another impact here in Genesis 3 is that the woman's childbirth becomes painful. So I would say that before that probably is just like passing motion. So yeah, after that, we have to ask this gynecologist. Yeah, that's all from us.
That's a fantastic response. Thank you again. Yeah, we see this. The word actually is Issabon. Issabon is the Hebrew word that's used for both the woman and the man in terms of the struggle of their work. And interestingly, some of the recent study that has come out is actually around producing a child as well as delivering a child is impacted. So the whole process of trying to have children is impacted as a result. It's not going to be as fruitful and easy as it once was. So that's part of the impact of sin and the curse of sin. Thank you.
All right, I would like to share from Genesis chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day that ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as God, and knowing good and evil. Today in this world, we see a lot of seducing spirits, just like in the Garden of Eden. I can just give three examples, very, very clear, distinct examples. Being a lecturer in a few other universities and colleges. One is, for example, like one of my colleagues, we have to perform our key performance index. Like you have to do community work, project activities. So my colleague say, hey, Chong, come and join us for the yoga, because today is yoga day. I said, no. He said, come. He would like seduce you, come. The manipulative spirit. I said, no. Second example is because when you work in the Muslim college or university government, sometimes I feel I'm in Little Mecca, because when they have Adil Adha, they hold ceremonies, and then they have this prayer, Allah, very strong. You can feel the atmosphere like Little Mecca. So when people eat and I eat, so when they bow down and they pray to the Allah, thank the food. So what do you do as a Christian? Do you thank the Allah together with them? Do you compromise with them? Number 3 is, for example, like, let me see, number three is, for example, I cannot remember what I want to say. Number three is, it's also a manipulative spirit, yeah. 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 But if you eat the Muslim food, they have been blessed by their Allah. They pray. I think if you ask the Lord Jesus Christ to cleanse the food, you can still eat the food. Yeah. But I still got one more. I cannot remember because it has to do with seducing spirits today working in our workplace. So we have to be very careful because it can reach the place of the sin or compromise. Yeah, because sin or compromise can be very, very big in that sense that it can reach to the level of, I heard a lot of pastors teach me, they say it's witchcraft. Yeah. So, this one I forgot. Hold on, let me think. What was that I wanted to say? I just can't seem to recall.
okay.
I think it's all right.
That's okay. You gave us some great examples. I'm very grateful for those examples. Yeah, I mean, it's a reality, isn't it? We see in this passage Satan at work, evil spirits at work, the seduction that can happen. And I think the workplace is one of the places, as you've said, Elizabeth, where that can happen really clearly, where we can just get seduced into, tempted into stepping away from obedience to God, not listening to God. Yeah. Thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciate it.
The sin affects relationship is because of the fall of man. So there will be, even among in the working place, there's competition, jealousy, there's politics at work. And also for a lot of people, they're work very hard, but they're still say not enough. So that's why they keep working overtime just to get a lot of money, but they still feel not enough.
Yeah, it's true.
Just a little bit of an addition. It says in the Bible, in sorrow shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. I think that that's generally for us differently, because most of us don't work on the land anymore, but work in other areas. And I think that where you have there the sin in is in the relationships, what you said also. In the relationships between people in work environments, I think that that's what makes some people even ill, so that they have to stay at home because they can't work anymore. I think the worst thing for people, there is the obligation to work, but sometimes the environment to work in is so bad that it's sick-making, and I think that's one of the bad stuff where people are confronted with.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so it's the context, the environment of work. Often when we read these verses, and I've heard people say, well, work is cursed. That was the result of the fall, that work is cursed. But I wonder if you read very carefully what you noticed, what is actually cursed in the passage. It's the ground that is cursed. And I think that's a really important point. It's not that work was good before and now work is forever bad. It's the process of work that is actually impacted by sin. Because the ground is cursed, we have to work harder. We have to work with more dedication, so it will be more productive because the productivity has been impacted by what has happened. So it's the context of work, the process of work, which is impacted by sin. And that's still relevant for us today. So that is why you have to work by the sweat of your brow, because the ground is no longer the beautiful, productive ground that it was meant to be. It's been impacted. This is part of the consequence of us not being obedient to God. And you also picked up on those terms, thorns and thistles. So thorns and thistles will come up. They will frustrate our work. They will make it more difficult to do work. These days I call it information technology, IT. That's where the thorns and thistles impact on me the most. Some of you work in IT, so you don't get impacted that way. But it's the idea of things impacting on our work, stopping us do our work in the most effective way. And that can be relationship stuff as well. So maybe it's a conflict with someone in your workplace that actually gets in the way of you being able to do the work that you want to do. Thorns and thistles might be the challenges that Elizabeth was mentioning that happen in the workplace, that impact on our ability to focus on the work because we're having to think through what does it mean to be a Christian in this place and what do we do and what don't we do. And then there's the impact of work as painful toil. Some of us experience that. For some of us, we do have to work physically very hard. Sometimes work hurts us. Some people are impacted by work in different ways. It may be that the work that you do hurts your back. You get injured because of your work in some way. Sometimes the painful toil is about the endurance that is required to do your work. There are some demands of you on your work. For some people, it's stress. Stress is one of the most significant impacts in terms of our work these days, in terms of the toil of work on our health. Sometimes it's mental health issues. The burden and responsibility of our work is so much that it wears us down and we get depressed or upset. So mental health issues are very big in the workplace. In the West, something that is growing, I'm not sure if it's here in Malaysia as well, is loneliness in the workplace is a terrible burden. People feeling that they're working by themselves, there's pressure on themselves, and they feel very lonely. They're working long hours and they don't have good relationships. So these are all the sorts of impacts that can happen. And I think we can see right here in Genesis 3, some of the seeds of that impact. We can see the impact of the consequences of that first sin and evil entering the world of work. Okay, we're going to have a look at some other parts of that impact, because what we have is we have sin coming in Genesis 3, and then in chapters 4 to 11 of Genesis, we see that this sin impact grows and grows and grows. So don't worry, I'm not going to make you read 8 chapters. But as a group, just choose which story you're going to read. So there are 2 stories specifically about work. Genesis 4, 1 to 16, which is about Cain and Abel and what they do with work and what happens. And Genesis 11, 1 to 9, which is about the Tower of Babel, or Babel as it's often known. So choose on the table which passage you want to look at, and then we'll have another look at it again, and then we'll talk about it. What do you see here about the impact on relationships with others, the impact on our work, and the impact on our relationship with God also? Thank you. Seems to not be forwarding right now, Tim. Oh, right, we're right now. Thanks. Sorry. Yeah, so here we have 2 brothers, and they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to offer the best of their work to God in worship. So they're trying to do the right thing. Now, we're not sure why there's a disparity between Cain and Abel's offerings. There are different theories about why this might be, and it may be that that Cain didn't offer the best of what he had. There's a possibilities for that. I'm really struck by the verse in that story that talks about sin is crouching at your door. It's an amazing verse, isn't it? And that's what it can be like in the workplace too. We heard about some of the temptations that Elizabeth was sharing with and others were sharing. Sin is crouching at the door. There can be temptations. Regardless of what happened in terms of the preference, we see immediately jealousy in the workplace, don't we? Jealousy and ambition. And these are the things I think that we notice in our workplaces that we can get caught up in too. We were just having a conversation at our table about the encouragement of young people to actually be ambitious in the workplace, to try and seize the opportunity. There's articles that I've read that talk about the good of monster ambition is the term, where basically you try and take every opportunity to talk down your work colleagues and to try and advance your own interests. And that's presented as virtuous in some way, as a way of getting ahead. So it's sort of this, it's all about me and I've got to advance in my career type concept. And that's what we see right back here. We see it starting here with Cain and Abel, that jealousy, that ambition, that desire to take revenge on someone who does better than you. And it's horrible, it's pernicious. If you have conflict with your work colleagues, I recommend you don't take Cain's result. That's not good. This is obviously the worst case scenario where he gets so inflamed by jealousy that he kills his own brother. I mean, that's astonishing, isn't it? But perhaps the anger that we feel towards someone else, thinking of the way that Jesus talks about hatred or anger towards someone else as bad as murder, maybe that's what we feel in the workplace. So we need to check our own motivations with that. And then we have Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. This is the closest I could come to in a Malaysian context. So here we have these people building a tower. So they've managed to conquer the technology of the brick, that really amazing technology that allows you to build big buildings. And you'll notice in the text, there's a line there where it talks about, because they wanted to make a name for themselves. This was the thing that actually broke them in terms of this. They're building a way up to heaven, and they want to make a name for themselves. They want to be known for how amazing they are in this building. That's a huge temptation in our work. Basically, it's the temptation to make work your idol. It's the place from which you get your sense of meaning and purpose. And there's a big temptation for all of us to do that, no matter what our work is. If our work is parenting, we may actually make our children our idol. How we feel about ourselves may depend on how our children are. We may pour so many of our resources into our children. Now, I'm not saying that we ignore our children, but they shouldn't be the ultimate thing. God always has to be the ultimate thing. If our work is the church, then I've seen people who make the church their idol. I'm particularly nervous when pastors talk about my church. It is never my church, it is always God's church. If we talk about our jobs, I've seen some people turn their jobs into their idols. There was a friend of mine whose father was a civil engineer, and I think his work was his idol. In fact, I know his work was his idol because he just poured himself into his work, and he was hardly around when his children were growing up. He had a slight check in it when his wife actually developed cancer, and he reduced his working hours to care for her. Sadly, she passed away while my friend was still young. But one day, after he had retired, he was going on the train, and he went past the factory where he used to work, the chemical factory. And there was nothing there. It was completely gone. And he got a terrible shock. And he rang my friend, and he was in tears, and he just said, "I'm so sorry." He said, "I realized I poured my whole life into that factory, and I neglected you, my daughter," and he neglected his son. He said, "I should have been more careful." So he admitted at that point that he had made his work his idol. And it's a big temptation to do that in our society, to try and get all your sense of meaning and purpose from your work, to see your work as everything. Work should never be everything. It should be something, but not everything. What happens in Genesis 11 in the Tower of Babel, there's another line that stands out to me, which is God came down. So it was almost as if they'd been ignoring God while they were building this tower. And then God came down, a reminder that God is sovereign over everything. If God came down and saw you doing your work, what would he see? Or are you inviting God into your work all the time, looking to work with God? God came down and then he scatters them as the consequence and mucks up all their languages. So these are the things that we see as a result of what we've read. This is the summary of how working is cursed. So it's the process of work. Remember, the ground was cursed, not work itself. Work is still a good thing. Work itself is not cursed. Work is still a good thing, but it's the process of work that has been impacted. And because the ground is cursed, the context is cursed, work is less productive than it may be. And you've probably felt that as well. You've done something, you're hoping that more will be achieved than it is. It's often slightly dissatisfying, our work. We never get as much out of it as we hope. We see that weeds, whatever they may be in our context, frustrate and distract us. The thorns and thistles that it talked about in Genesis 3. There are ways that we get frustrated and distracted in our daily work. We have to work by the sweat of our brow. Work is tough and it can be hard. And as someone said, it may not be physically tough or hard, but it may be emotionally and mentally tough and hard. It's also harder to work with God. Remember, work was meant to be something where we worked with God. But from Genesis 3, there's this break in our relationship with God where we have to remember to work with God. Working relationships are impacted. We've seen a few ways that this has happened. One of the things that we also see start to happen from this point is that work is actually used as a punishment. So I said yesterday that because work is intrinsic to who we are as human beings, one of the worst things you can do is not allow people to work. We need to work to be well. But the other bad thing that you can do with work is make people work, as in slavery. So you'll notice that God's people, after this time, end up in slavery in Egypt. And that's one of the worst things you can do with work. Work is no longer, you have no choice over your work. You work harder than you're meant to work. You don't see the results of your work in terms of good pay and good conditions. All the wonder, all the good of work is taken away from you in slavery. And slavery, of course, is still something that really impacts on so many people in the world today. So it's good that Christians in particular have a real heart to free people from slavery. Work feels fruitless sometimes. As we said, we can make work an idol. And work itself can be, we use our work to make idols. So we see in the Old Testament that people who had work, either making metal or making things with wood, they actually turned it into idols. So there was this connection between your work and idols in the Old Testament, where you actually make idols out of your work. In our day, probably the bigger danger is that work itself can become an idol. So that's a summary of what we heard. I wanted to talk about someone who really has struggled with work, who I came across one time. Her name is Christine. This is not an actual picture of Christine, but this is I think this is a good description of the state that I found her in. So Christine was someone I met when I was in Singapore. She was a worker in Singapore in the finance industry. The first time I met her was at a workshop, like one of these workshops. She was sitting in the front row, and she just looked really sad the whole time I was talking. I couldn't help but notice that she just didn't look happy at all. And after the workshop, I went up to her and had a chat to her, and I found out that she was in a really, really difficult situation. So she was a strong Christian, and what had happened was, while she'd been working with the bank, about a year before I met her, she had been encouraged to sell a product to clients, and she knew that this financial product, they hadn't told the client the whole thing. So she'd been doing it for a while, and then she found out that there was a problem with this financial product, and the client didn't know what the problem was. She was really concerned about this, so she went to her manager and said, "We are basically lying to our customers here." The manager said to her very briefly, "Either put up with it or leave." That's it. For Christine, this was a really hard choice because Christine was married with a child. Her husband was unable to work, so she was providing for her family. And as is common in Asian context, she was also providing for her family, her parents, who were living in Australia. And she was also providing for her husband's parents as well. So there were 3 families that were dependent on her one income. She prayed about what she should do, and even though she felt discomfort about continuing in this role, she felt that she wasn't sure whether she had a real choice in it. So she continued to work, and she felt really divided about it. But the prayer that she prayed from that point was that she would see God's justice in her organization, in her work context. Well, one day we kept in contact after that workshop, and one day she told me that something that had happened had meant that she began to see God's justice on the move. So in terms of her corporation, her financial corporation, in Hong Kong, they had begun an investigation into the Hong Kong department, and they had uncovered this problem. So the product that they were lying about, they'd actually done that in many countries. So the investigation came to Hong Kong, and there was a consequence. She sent me this text. One more thing. It went through Hong Kong. She knew they were coming to Singapore, and she knew that eventually they would catch up with every department around the world. And they did come to Singapore. Before they came, as the investigation came closer through the different countries, she said the 2 biggest atheists in her office, who knew she was a Christian, came up to her and asked her to pray for them. They said to her, "You believe your God is a powerful God. We see that you are faithful as a Christian. Please pray for us." They were very nervous. But the investigation came through Singapore, and her whole department were dismissed. Christine had all the emails. She had the emails of her talking to her manager, the manager saying, "Don't worry about it and keep working." She complained a number of times and they ignored her, and she kept all those emails, and she was able to show the investigators. But in spite of that, they said that she had been compliant with this, she had been involved in this, and so she had to lose her job. The thing that really upset her was that none of the managers were impacted. It was just all the people in her department who got sacked. And so she sent me this email. "It's been almost 10 months since I was dismissed and without work, and no success with the interviews, as there is a black mark against me from the regulatory authorities. Of the 11 traders in Hong Kong who were dismissed, so far 8 of them have found work. So it looks like the regulatory authorities there had no issue with them. But 2 of the guys still unemployed had been with the firm for 25 to 30 years, and the firm refused to give them their life's pension. They told them if they intend to collect it, they will sue them in the High Court. It is just plain ridiculous and bullying. So for me, this case is not just about me, but the silent and scared voices who are too scared or afraid to speak up." So Christine decided, as you can see, she was unemployed, and also her financial license had been taken away from her. She decided that she would go to court and try and show that it wasn't just her department that were impacted, but try and appeal about the managers and point out what they had done to stand up. I wasn't sure how to respond to her. Like, when you're a teacher, you can say the things that you think should happen, but it's very hard when someone is actually suffering through the consequences of those decisions. But I learned a lot through Christine. She wrote to me Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever stepped out in faith, knowing without a doubt that He had called you to do something, obey Him, even risk everything, and yet God doesn't come through? I really wrestled with that. I thought I had obeyed the Lord and acted upon His commands for me, yet God didn't come through. I staked my reputation on His word, and He failed me. At that point, my heart sunk, because I wasn't sure what I could offer her in terms of a response. But she answered her own question. She said, then perhaps we start to think maybe my faith wasn't strong enough, or I didn't pray hard enough, or I misinterpreted His word. So what do you do now even? And this is the crunch. For me, I can only still cling onto His words. Isaiah 55, 8-9, God says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. It's just so impacted by her faith at that point. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand why it was happening. How could she keep going, trusting God, which was the only thing that I was trying to encourage her in and pray for her in, when it didn't seem as if anything good was coming from it. And then she said this, and when I cannot understand, I must trust that He is still in control, for we know that He will use everything for His glory and for our good. While the disappointments we experience are not necessarily God's will for our lives, nothing can touch us without His permission, just like in the book of Job. If He allows it, it will be for some greater purpose and for His kingdom glory. Isn't that incredible faith? It's beautiful. That even though she is suffering, even though she feels she has been obedient, it's hard. It's hard. And all she can do is surrender to God and put a trust in His provision. So she went through with trying to go to court. It was impacted by the pandemic. And unfortunately, she lost the case. And this seemed like a further crushing blow. And yet, even though she has lost the case, she said this, anyway, in order to win, I had to lose. I may have lost my court case, but what I gained was my spiritual maturity and a deeper walk and relationship with the Lord, as my growth with Him is off the charts. And never have I journaled or prayed so fervently in my life. And that is actually my experience of her. That first time I met her in Singapore, she was sad, she was down, she was questioning God a lot. And somehow, even though in the eyes of the world, I guess, she's just experiencing failure upon failure upon failure, her trust of God in God is growing and growing and growing. Her spiritual maturity is growing, and God is using it in a powerful way. That could be the end of the story, but it's not the end of the story. 3 years after that first time that I met her, on the 9th of June 2021, she gave me this message: glory and honor to God. My regulatory financial license approval came through on Monday, so I am good to go back into the same line of work and industry. And just a week after this, she sent me a photo. The photo was of her in her office, her new office in her new workplace. And it was a photo of another building, and she'd taken the photo looking down at the building next door. And she explained to me that she had taken a photo of her old office in the old financial institution she used to work with. And she thought it was God's beautiful providence that in her new work, she was higher up and looking down on her old office. Incredible. God came through in an amazing way, in a miraculous way for Christine. And that's a good ending, but you can see the trouble and the suffering that she went through on the way. But I think regardless of what the outcome would have been, Christine's relationship with God was so deepened by her experience of relying on God and working with God and even suffering. And I see a lot of Jesus in that. It was God's beautiful mercy that He has blessed her now with a very good job, and she is able to provide for everyone well again. But she is also going in as a much, much stronger Christian into that workplace as a result. But I want you to pause and think and have a chat on your table. How is working bad for you? How is your work, paid or unpaid, impacted by sin and difficult things? Are there ethical issues that you struggle with? Are there difficult people in your workplace that you have to deal with? Maybe even in the home. Are there broken systems or structures that you have to deal with? Is it the sin within you that you notice that comes out sometimes at work? Are there toxic work cultures? And someone spoke about that, the context of work and sometimes the very difficult work situations in which we're in. How is your working bad or difficult? Why don't you just share on your table briefly? It can get overwhelming thinking about all the bad things that happen at work, can't it? We suddenly become aware of all the struggles and all the difficulties of work. But it's good to be realistic about it. And I think what we have in the Bible is an explanation for why work sometimes feels so hard and it's such a struggle. But of course, that's not the end of the story. I love these words from Pastor Bob Thune. He's a pastor in America, and he was writing an article in Gospel Coalition. And he said, it's important that we see both the goodness of work in God's original creation and the struggle of work under the fall. If we only see the good, we'll be frustrated when things don't go as we think they should. If we only see the bad, we'll have a hard time doing our work to the glory of God. Work is not all good and it's not all bad. It is part of God's good creation, which has been tainted by the fall. And God is at work to redeem work, which is the subject of our next workshop. But I think it's really important to remember that. Sometimes we can get so down by how hard work is or the struggles of work that we can forget that work is still a place where it's possible for good things to happen. And we need to remember to do our work to the glory of God in the midst of all the hardness that we see around. We come to our final sharing session. What I'd like you to do is think about what's the one takeaway that you can take from this workshop and apply at work. What is the one thing that you can do for your work, paid or unpaid? One thing that you've realized, you've learnt, that God has challenged you, one thing that you can actually put into practice. And we might have a bit of sharing from this when you've had to think about it. Okay, so just a couple of examples from people of things they're going to apply, and Anne will run as required. Just a show of hands if anyone who wants to share. Don't be shy, we can all benefit. Who would like to share something that they've learnt? Okay, Jean has already volunteered somewhere. This is fantastic. Thank you, brother.
My takeaway is the work is still the same. It's just that the process is getting difficult. Process is the one that is cursed.
Thank you. So it's the process that is cursed, not work itself. Thank you. Someone else who want to share? One more, perhaps? Hey, behind you, a friend from the Netherlands.
Yeah, living in the UK. But what made me think about today, the chapter 11, where it told the story about Babylon. God came down, yeah? He was in charge, even for people that didn't believe in him. So what can we expect nowadays? Glory, for God will always be with us, even if we struggle. And by struggle, it's very sad that, that it's the case, but by our struggles, we learn, and we can conquer, and we go on, and we grow as a Christian.
Beautiful. God is still in control, even over those people who don't acknowledge him. Thank you very much. That's glorious. Okay, let me pray for us and the struggles of our work, and then we'll have a break. Dear Lord, there are some people here who do face very serious struggles at work. There are some people here who I've heard talk about some of the ethical challenges at work, some of the temptations of work, some of the personal conflicts at work. There's some people here who have managers and leaders who are bullies, who do bad things. There are some people here who carry stress of very hard work. I pray, Lord, that you would help us to know that you are with us in the midst of those struggles. You are not far away. You want to journey with us in the midst of those struggles, and we can put our trust in you. Although relief might not happen straight away, we know that we are secure in you, and that ultimately we will have the glory that is ours in Christ because of what Jesus has done. I pray, Lord, for those who are struggling, that they would experience what Christine experienced, that the struggle would actually draw them closer to you, that they would grow in their faith in you, that they would become more mature like Jesus, even because of those struggles. And I pray, Lord, that you would remind us of the hope we have in Jesus. And we pray in his name. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. Yeah, for good session, yes. Okay, so now we have a short break.